who are just joining us here at the Schomburg Community Center. Welcome to the MV Book Festival 2025, and thank you for coming and for supporting these authors and for your appreciation of great writing. We're happy you're here. The way to support this festival and the authors that participate in it is to buy their books from the Bunch of Grapes bookstore tent over there, and not on Amazon, not on Kindle, but to go buy it here and meet with the author after the session and have him sign your book. Book signings do follow. We have one more session after this one, but book signings do follow every session throughout the festival. And today's author, Jason, will be signing his book immediately following the session in the book signing tent, which is over there. Don't go hungry, we have food. Please buy it and support these island vendors. Water is available throughout the festival thanks to Island Source. And if you need anything else, see one of the ushers or go to the info tent, which is directly behind us. The author will take questions from the audience at the end of this discussion. When asking a question, please line up at one of the two microphones over here in the aisle and ask a question. Do not make long statements, and let others have a chance to speak, and let the author speak as well. So on to introductions. This afternoon, we are honored to welcome Jason Stanley to Martha's Vineyard Book Festival to discuss his book, Erasing History. And he is with his friend and colleague, Khalil Muhammad. Okay. Jason Stanley is the Bissell-Heyd Chair in American Studies at the Munk School of Global Affairs and Public Policy, the University of Toronto, and the best-selling author of How Fascism Works and the new Erasing History, How Fascists Rewrite the Past to Control the Future. Drawing on urgent, fact-based analysis, it warns that democracy depends on a shared reality and collective memory, both under threat by authoritarian forces rewriting history. A frequent contributor to the New York Times, the Washington Post, and the Guardian, Stanley also serves on the board of the Prison Policy Initiative. Khalil Gibran Muhammad is the inaugural professor of African American Studies and Public Affairs at Princeton University, where he directs the Institutional Antiracism and Accountability Project. He is board chair of the Vera Institute of Justice and a WGBH contributor to Boston Public Radio. He is the former Ford Foundation Professor of History, Race, and Public Policy at the Harvard Kennedy School and the former director of the Schomburg Center for Research in Black Culture, the world's leading library and archive of global Black history. So please join me in welcoming them.
Thanks, everyone, for being here. Jason, this is really great to see you.
As always, Khalil.
If things continue to go as they are, neither one of us will have a job.
But we will have predicted it.
We will have predicted it. We'll be right on the right side of history.
As academics, right. Being right is the highest.
That's all you can count on for legacy building.
Exactly.
I just want to point out there were some boos in the audience because notably absent from your brief bio there was your many years at Yale University.
Oh, yes, I remember that.
And your Yale colleagues are here. I think in some ways, you know, we'll kind of start in the present and move back a little bit, because I think that's an interesting way to get the audience engaged in who you are for those that don't know. So why are you no longer at Yale University, Jason Stanley?
Which answer do you want?
Well, the efficient one for this purpose.
So I think one way to think about it is that, you know, I'm a philosopher and I made a certain prediction. I have a certain theory about what is happening in the United States and in the world. And when you follow that theory logically, you know, it says that, you know, you should, if you are fortunate and privileged enough to have the opportunity, you should leave. So it's a little surreal to me that I actually have to leave now. That wasn't
Leave the United States. Yeah, let's be clear.
Let's leave the
Not
United
just
States.
Yale. Yeah.
Oh, right. I mean, if it's really fascism, and if things are as I think they are, then there's going to be a certain logical procession of things, and people won't recognize that. People will engage in wishful thinking, and people will try to convince you that it can't be that bad. And it's not like I'm not prone to that wishful thinking. I turned down this position on January 20th, because if you remember that interregnum period before Trump came, everyone's like, oh, it's not going to be so bad. And, he was Democrat.
Not in my household, but go ahead.
Oh, right, yeah. Some people, there was a moment for wishful thinking that was possible. But then I just thought, okay, I have been thinking and writing and theorizing about this for a long time. And also, you and I have been talking for 15 years now about how bad the United States has always been. So you have to factor that in, and you have to compare this complex thing of like, it's always been really bad, to how bad is it going to get given how awful it's always been. And so you had to do that thing. And so in the end, I was like, there's a 35% chance that it'll get, that this country will simply, be somewhere between Orban's Hungary, probably not as bad as Putin's Russia, but somewhere where the rule of law just, and institutions just cave in a way that's familiar in India, for example.
Yeah. So short takeaway is that you made a huge decision, both personal and professional, to leave Yale and the United States to take a position at the University of Toronto because of what's happening in the world and the potential threat to all of us, for which you just happen to be on the leading edge. Now, Jason has written a book of how fascism works, and I won't poll the audience for those who've read, but if you've read the book, you also know that Jason is the grandchild of Holocaust survivors. Child. So his parents escaped, and it's your grandmother, though, who does the work of trying to warn people. Yeah, so let's give a little context, which both informs the book you've written, a previous book you've written, and your own choices.
Right. Great. So my grandmother, my father's family was a very not wealthy, but prestigious Berlin family. My great-grandfather was the cantor of the largest Jewish congregation in Germany, in Berlin. And my grandmother was an actor, and they were a well-to-do Berlin Jewish family, deeply assimilated. There were two Jews who sang for Wagner, my great-grandfather and his brother. So you couldn't be more German than my family. So I kind of knew growing up that you can be deeply assimilated, you can be socially high in a culture, and still, things can go badly. So by a kind of constructed targeting. So my grandmother, however, was much more heroic than I am. I mean, that's a ridiculous, absurd comparison. She, starting in 1936, she had a friend who was a Gestapo agent. Not a friend who was a Gestapo agent. She went into the Gestapo Leitstelle in Alexanderplatz when her cousin had been taken away, disappeared. And she went in to find out what happened to him, which was crazy to do in 1936. But she ran into a Gestapo officer who took her to the side, and you couldn't look in their eyes, but he said, Ilsa, don't you recognize me? And it was a security guard she had hired at her theater that she had started, and she had been so nice to him. And he said, I'll just, whatever you want. He had told her then, you're so kind to me, I'll do anything for you. So she said, would you give a life back for can you help me
spare her friend?
Spare my friend. And then he supplied her with a uniform of a Nazi social worker. And back then, every German had a Jewish person who was a good Jewish person, and they would. So she went into Sachsenhausen, the concentration camp, and over the years brought a bunch of people out. So she was seeing what was going on, and then after Kristallnacht, when things got really bad, then it was almost impossible to leave. And that's how I know that it's like everybody who gets out at a certain point has some miracle story. And I'm not suggesting that I would ever be in that position, but it's still what informs. And then my mother lived through it all. My mother's family was entirely killed. So that's. And then also, my mother was working in Manhattan criminal court as a court stenographer for 33 years, and she was never thought that the United States had the rule of law.
Yeah. Well, that is certainly something we'll get to. Homegrown fascism in the United States, a.k.a. Jim Crow. So let's get to the book. This is a book that, in some ways, is a book of the moment. And it draws on history and political theory, and it scans the globe for patterns that you've put together. And I open this up with this because it's precisely the timeliness of the book that I think makes the book so incredibly urgent for anyone who hasn't read it yet and is listening to this conversation. We're all reading the news, but we may not be able to see the way all these things connect across at least 3 continents. And the patterns are striking. So let's just start with the basic question. What was the moment you decided I have to document this moment and get this book out? Are we talking Trump won? Biden's election? When was it?
Great question. So I think I see this book as a kind of prequel to How Fascism Works. So How Fascism Works is about the kind of fascist politics and rhetoric, which obviously anyone familiar with what was happening in the world and American history and European history would have seen that this kind. I teach Mein Kampf and at Yale every year, and that's the rhetoric, the xenophobia,
Trump's
the racism.
favorite book, by the way.
What?
One of his favorite books. He keeps bedside. Isn't this
right,
documented?
Trump. Well, yeah, no, that's not documented.
It's apocryphal?
Well, I think it's apocryphal, but his father might have been in the Bund and in the German, not the Bund, that's a Jewish, the German, I mean, his father might have had Nazi sympathies. We don't know. It's unclear whether the kind of authoritarian, sort of fascist ideological authoritarianism is a kind of natural inclination. He also harkens back to a time in the United States, as we see with tariffs, that is the fascist time in the United States, and Hitler is deeply influenced by that time.
All right, I got you off track. Forget Fred.
Yes, Chris Hayes reminded us. He wants us to be talking about him all the time. Yeah. So this is a kind of prequel to How Fascism Works. It's like, how do you create a society where that kind of politics will be repeatedly successful? Well, how do you create a politics where people where great replacement theory is just continually a way to get people to into a state of frenzy? Well, you tell them, Hitler's very clear about this in Mein Kampf, where he says, we need an education system where people learn about the great men of their history, and they learn about the great Aryan men, and they connect their nation to the exploits of the great Aryan men. And we already sort of had that education system.
That's right. Briefly went away for about 18 months.
Right, exactly.
Fall of 2020 till the spring of 2022.
Yeah, and when I was young, I read books that that told me by omission that no woman had ever done anything in history. So, which is kind of wild because there's a lot of women, so I knew also looking at the southern states, and I feel like we must have discussed this for a while. Looking at the southern states, this has been happening. The attack on CRT, then moving over to the backlash. The backlash to the 1619 Project, but also it's happening worldwide. So the educational structures to cement fascist rule.
Okay, so let's pause there and set some context. So sounds like the ideas were already set in motion before How Fascism Works, but there are fast-moving developments happening after the summer of 2020 when you start to take note of the metastasization of this criminalization of learning, anti-CRT, anti-critical race theory, essentially criminalization of anything that would have any student in America question the greatness of America, which, as you've already said, is fundamental to fascist politics, that the nation must be held in the highest honor, and a certain kind of heroic figure always has to stand in. So the Founding Fathers, great white men, et cetera. You call this a mythic, glorious past. Okay, so you see all of that under attack.
Right. Also, these lectures were first given in Kyiv. When I taught in August 2023, I accepted a position at the Kyiv School of Economics, and I taught a 2-week intensive...
For our youngest audience, the capital of Ukraine.
Oh, yeah. I taught a 2-week, like an 8-day intensive, 3-hour-a-day summer school on colonialism in the midst of a war. And the syllabus was almost all black authors, because I wanted to see how much do you see your own experience in the global, colonialism is a central philosophical concept like democracy, and I wanted to see, like, what is the structure here? Do you see yourself reflected in the sort of European colonization of Africa, indigenous experiences in America, and the black experiences in America? So we read Du Bois. We read a lot of Du Bois, Fanon, of course, Césaire. So these lectures were first given in that context, informed by my 6 years of teaching philosophy of education at Yale.
And what was the response? Did they see themselves in these stories?
Well, it was very interesting. You had to maneuver a little bit to get it right. First of all, the Ukrainians view in any colonial enterprise, the colonizing force views themselves as civilized, and the people they're colonizing as savages. And so Ukrainians do not have that view of Russians. But the Russians have that view because they see LGBTQ equality as savagery and decadence. And they speak, if you look at Putin's speeches, he is speaking like, look, they're bringing in, trans people, and they're bringing in, they're destroying Christian traditions. So there is, but all the, almost all the structures, yeah, I mean, no two colonial situations are the same. So we spent a lot of time on British colonialism in Kenya.
Okay. So it sounds like there's also a bigger story for which we've talked a little bit about Hitler's Germany, but because you're already teaching colonialism, not just in the U.S. context, but you're teaching it in other parts of the world, you are already able to establish a baseline pattern for what a kind of anti-education project, which is what you describe in the book, which I want you to define now, looks like, what a sort of classic colonial approach to domination looks like, that you see unfolding in the U.S., but you have many examples to draw upon already.
Yeah, exactly right. Because ultimately I'm a philosopher. We've been talking for many years, and you have, I think condemnation has a strong philosophical, the discussions of objectivity are link into philosophy.
That's my book, by the way.
Right, yeah. Like when I teach that book, I don't really teach it as an American book. I say, look, objectivity gets misused here in ways that feminist philosophy has been telling us for a long time. So I'm a philosopher, so I look for patterns and concepts like colonialism, and then the different places are like history that I can plug in. And different colonial situations, there are some differences. So in Ukraine, I'm seeing what's happening all over the world is sort of fascism and colonialism having this resurgence. India, United States, obviously, all over Europe.
Let's just give a concrete example of how does the education system get attacked? And say, we could use Hungary as one example, Orban's Hungary. What happened there?
Okay, let me give you an example in Orban's Hungary that is resonant here. So there was Hungary's only Nobel Prize winner in literature after World War II, Imre Kertész, was taught in the national curriculum. Orbán removed, and he was a Holocaust survivor, Hungarian Holocaust survivor, who writes about from the perspective of a Jewish Hungarian Holocaust survivor. So his work was removed from the curriculum of public schools. Now, and replaced with sort of very minor anti-Semitic, ultra-nationalist Hungarian writers who no one has ever heard of, who are now required reading. And
Harvard's hiring a lot of them right now.
Right, exactly. Right. Well, viewpoint diversity. So if you think about countries removing Nobel Prize, the books, the novels of Nobel Prize winners in literature from oppressed groups, historically oppressed groups in those countries, Toni Morrison,
James Baldwin,
right? James Baldwin. That. So then they sort of they talked a lot. They talk a lot about. It's kind of like if the South's official story of the past took over all of American schools. So like,
really?
Well, like we suffered,
except in Massachusetts, of course.
We suffered this great loss. Trianon, Hungary lost. It's like Hitler and the Nazi education system was very focused on the loss of African colonies in World War I in Versailles. Like, look at what happened to us. Look at this terrible thing that was done to us. That's happening in Hungary. You're learning a lot about, the greatness of all of these nationalist writers are being elevated. The critical writers from oppressed groups are being removed from the curriculum. You're learning a flat story of the nation's past. Any of its supposed failings were, in fact, treachery, or these weren't Here's an example. I'm talking a lot in Germany lately. There's a sort of debate in Germany. The anniversary of the victory of the surrender of the Nazis is called Tag der Befreiung, the Day of Liberation. And AfD is challenging that. They're saying, what other country calls its loss the Day of Liberation? So, this kind of reviewing of the past, where the bad things become good, the bad things, like, no, why should we say they're bad? They're part of our glorious past. That's the structure. That's a very common structure. And then the erasures, obviously.
And finally, the closing of the only, essentially, George Soros' Central University.
What I honestly think Harvard should do is move to Toronto. I'm honest.
That would be bad for Toronto.
Oh, yeah. Now you say that because you're at Princeton, but but I think that Central European University. Orbán went to the Heritage Foundation and had closed-door meetings during the writing of Project 2025. So he is, and what we're seeing with accreditation, that's how they got CEU with accreditation. They said you can't.
Explain it, though.
Oh, right.
Yeah, walk us through precisely how Orbán took over the university.
Oh, right. Well, you're going to be watching it, or you were watching it right now. It's the structures. Also, India is an important example, although there's less obvious direct connection in terms of the people. I'm trying to identify which governments are speaking. It's clear that AfD in Germany is working very closely with the Trump administration, because the new reorganization of the State Department has an office called the Office of Remigration, and remigration was the campaign slogan of AfD in the last federal election. So, and of course, Vance went to Germany and only met with the head of AfD, and this is the most extreme far-right European party. I'll say a little bit about accreditation, and then I want to...
Just the basics.
Okay, right. So what Orbán did is he had the Hungarian parliament, which he controls, pass a bill saying you could only be accredited to give out degrees in Hungary if you were allowed to be, where you were accredited in Hungary. and CEU was accredited, was giving out degrees accredited by Bard College, because everybody wants an American accredited degree, because our accreditation system is so used to be right. So then he used the accreditation system. CEU could no longer hand out degrees, so they had to move to Vienna. But I think, like, unlike CEU, Harvard can in fact move to Toronto.
Okay, all right, that remains.
No, I mean, some universities has got to move.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not kidding.
Well, it's already happening. I mean, we were just talking before that I used to teach at the Harvard Kennedy School almost a decade, and this fall, 56% last year when I was teaching in the fall of our students are international students. So this fall, some portion of those students will take residency at the University of Toronto.
At the Munk School.
At the Munk School, where they will be taking classes remotely at the Kennedy School.
Oh, no, they'll be taking our classes for Harvard credit.
For Harvard. Oh, I didn't know that.
And then they can graduate with Harvard degrees taking our classes.
Well, there you go. So that is moving, right? That's exactly what you've just described.
And Janice Stein, our director, said, we were like, what is this going to do to our class size? And she said, we have to do it.
Yeah. Okay. All right, so we've got 15 minutes to dig into the book a little bit more. We've had really big context. We've talked internationally, so we have some context for how this book is made and who you are as a scholar and the big ideas and the seeing things around the world. But let's break things down a little bit more practically. I mean, it is my sense that the crisis of higher education, the attack on elite schools in particular, the red state attack on, I used to teach at Indiana University. It's not in the news as much as Harvard or Columbia, but Indiana University has been eviscerated. The state legislature, which is Republican dominated, has essentially gotten rid of tenure. They've created litmus tests for who gets to teach there. They are destroying the caliber of one of the finest land-grant universities in this country. Many others will be, in red states, will be following suit because of the patterns that are playing out there. But it is still my sense that when you read the New York Times or the Washington Post, there is still this idea that somehow higher education brought this on itself, that they were too woke, too much DEI, too much tuition costs, bloated administration, and they're kind of getting what they deserve. They need to be knocked down a peg. And maybe not in this audience. After all, you're all here on a beautiful island listening to a philosopher. So I get it. But there is a sense still that the concern about education as a critical part of fascist politics has not yet reached the consciousness of many Americans.
Oh. Well, right. Different points you make there, but my blood is boiling as you speak.
Run with it.
Did you see my Guardian piece? The mainstream media has normalized Trump's attack on universities.
I did not. Tell us about it.
So, the New York, in that piece, which I did the research for, so the data is there, but like the New York Times published today, the New York Times published their first article ever about campus reform. So the university professors have been viciously attacked by right-wing media since 2011, but especially since 2015. Then our university president at Yale, or their university president at Yale over there, I should say I was very, very happy at Yale because of these colleagues, essentially, and so it was tough to move. But our university, the Yale University president would say the view of universities started declining in 2015 and has been declining ever since. Well, what happened in 2015? Jonathan Haidt and Greg Lukianoff published a piece in The Atlantic called The Coddling of the American Mind, saying that students were snowflakes and afraid of being exposed to scientific racism, and then you had centrist liberals, people who presented themselves as centrist liberals, simply straightforwardly spitting the William F. Buckley to political correctness attack on universities. And universities, like all institutions in American life, are run by anti-woke white men. And so none of this was true. And so the New York Times published like countless numbers of concerned trolling articles, op-eds about leftists on campus. And I was looking around, I was like, where are the leftists on campus? I mean, a couple of them, 1.5 of them is here.
There may not be leftists, but they're also known as Marxist lunatics, right?
Marxist lunatics. And this was the Atlantic, the New York Times. And it's kind of hard to distinguish. And David Leonhardt was like, well, we all agree that campuses have problems with anti-Semitism and
they cut your mic.
Right. and wokeness, and this was like totally news to me. The other thing was the just handing the lies that the mainstream media told about what was happening on campus, including the protests last year, where as a Jewish professor with many Jewish students who were in the encampments, who were having seders in the encampments, who were celebrating Shabbat in the encampments, it's a Jewish civil war that's happening, but that the newspapers completely erased the fact that there were lots of different groups of students, but no group of students larger than the Jewish students. They were equally as present as any other group and very vocal, and that was completely erased by the newspapers. Thereby, first of all, that's anti-Semitic, saying that we have, to be Jewish means to be pro-genocide. That's anti-Semitic. And that the universities went along with this when they know perfectly well that many of us Jewish faculty were highly critical, is understating it, what Israel's actions, and Jewish students even more so. So the newspapers, the New York Times, the Atlantic, why weren't they were the ones creating this panic. And they normalized the panic. In the 90s, they didn't jump on the political correctness hysteria bandwagon.
No, it's breathtaking, and now my blood is boiling, which I'll keep most of my outrage to myself. But so let's talk about it. You've opened up the space for explaining to people who have not read this book and who may also be confused at precisely how what you and I would agree, but might need, some explaining for people. How has anti-Semitism been weaponized to actually destroy higher education?
Well, I mean, it's
It's on.
Okay. It's, as Masha Gessen calls it, it's an anti-Semitic attack on anti-Semitism. Because this administration, this regime, leans into stereotypes. That's why they love Mayor Adams, because he represents
Eric Adams of New York.
Yeah.
Yes.
A corrupt black politician. They want to accentuate that stereotype, and that they're accentuating the stereotype that we control the institutions, that Jewish people control the institutions. They're creating anti-Semitism, and they're obviously linking us to something that is an unconscionable horror. So it's anti. I just purely see, it's never that great for my people to be in the news all the time. Like, we try not to be in the news. And so putting us in the news is not great. And so that's what they're doing relentlessly. And for some reason, the Anti-Defamation League, I only realized this recently, that non-Jewish people think the Anti-Defamation League speaks for Jewish people. Like, I never knew that. So they speak for, right-wing Israeli policy. So this, I think it of a piece, the cynical manipulation, people spitting great replacement theory, which was in Hitler and Nazism, Jews are the people behind replacing whites.
Right.
The people spitting great replacement theory are also the people claiming there's all this anti-Semitism.
Well, even the point about the great replacement theory, just to define that, the argument at the height of Trump's first term, in the midst of the Charlottesville blowback, so the Charlottesville right-wing Jews will not replace us, for which Trump essentially sanctioned and excused, oh boy, I forgot my point.
Well, right. He's sanctioning.
I am on vacation. Okay, got it. It's back. Thank you. So the definition circulating then amongst the right wing was that Jews were the conduit through which blacks and Latinos or Latine people were taking over American higher education.
Yeah.
Jews were the portal opening the door for the destruction of America from the savages coming from the global south.
Exactly.
That was the argument.
And that's straight from Mein Kampf.
Right. And this is precisely the context for the Tree of Life synagogue shooting in 2018, which remains a clear example of the most proximate and an immediate threat to Jewish safety in the United States of America.
Absolutely right. It's any anti-Semite, when they hear we're being replaced, the heritage Americans are being replaced, an anti-Semite will hear that as Jews are doing the replacement, right, because that's like almost definitional.
Right.
And that we control the institutions and the press and the universities.
So I'm going to read a quote from you from the book that just puts a bow on this point. You say, right-wing media, this summarizes what we've just talked about, immediately and cynically used Israel's war on Gaza to direct what is essentially wartime propaganda against universities, as well as their professors, administrators, and students. They set out the strategy of placing universities as allies of Hamas from the very beginning, directly after Hamas's terrorist attack on Israel, and far in advance of student protests against Israel's response. The propaganda prepared its audience to view the inevitable anti-war protests as supporting Hamas, no matter what their form or content. This has proven an effective method of intimidating universities.
So I should concede that I then go on to speak about a Fox News episode that a colleague of mine brought my attention to, Elizabeth Hinton, who contacted me right after seeing this in like mid-October 2023. It's like, she's saying like universities, and she just laid it out. She's like, look, they're saying universities are pro-Hamas, and they're going to use this against universities. So that's why one reason Yale is great. The colleagues were.
Yeah. Well, I saw with my own eyes. It might have been the same. Netanyahu was on Meet the Press.
Right.
And called attention to universities as the greatest threat to Israel, for which, of course, all of those protesters on campus are 5,000 miles away from Israel.
Right. I mean, but this was October 2023 when there were no protests, they had just laid the basis for this.
Yeah.
Right, and they tied in the
Elizabeth
immigration
Hinton is with us helping Jason.
Exactly. Yeah.
She's still helping Jason.
Yeah. So
also a wonderful author, America on Fire.
Huge influence on me.
Yes.
I just want to point out that in 2019, because I just always think it's vital now to think globally, because Steve Bannon has been thinking globally for a decade. And so you're really wrong, like, to not understand that the global far right is all connected. I mean, Trump just put sanctions on the Brazilian Supreme Court justice who has stayed steadfast to convict Bolsonaro. So it's all connected, and we need to think this way too. In 2019, when India passed its Citizenship Amendment Act, which made Muslims into second-class citizens, Pindra Todd, a group in India who did Me Too for the universities, organized these protests in the elite universities against the Citizenship Amendment Act on behalf of Muslim equality. The media represented these protests as anti-national, anti-Indian, pro-Muslim. The mainstream media, they were at elite universities. Public opinion they said they were terrorists. Police came in, tear gas, beat everybody up, and arrested the organizers and accused them of incitement to riot, treason, and imprisoned them. Yeah. And it really looks like something very similar happened here.
Yeah. Well, we are going to open, so if you would like to ask a question in just a couple of minutes, you can cue to the microphones. We have one on each side of the stage. So I want to bring it down, just before we open the floor, to something quite personal. I think it helps. We started with your family. I'm going to share the way some of this has fallen in the context in which I work. So you've talked about colonialism. We talked about it here. It's in the book. You've drawn patterns of places that themselves were once colonies of Great Britain, for example. And I don't know if people realize this, but Harvard University issued an anti-Semitism report. And that report came out about 6 weeks ago. That report is now the basis for the government's negotiation with Harvard University that may look similar to what Columbia University has hashed out, which is to say Harvard is going to pay the federal government some unseemly amount of money in exchange for getting access back to its grants. But in this anti-Semitism task force, they determined that the very concept of settler colonialism is definitionally anti-Semitic.
Well, that's you cut out. That's characteristic. That's like eliminating structural racism because you want to take out the concepts that enable you to label to explain what the resistance is to.
Absolutely. So I wanted to trickle down to that though, because we've all watched the Republican Party under Congress, which led the hearings that led to the ouster of Claudine Gay, the president of Harvard, the ouster of the president of Penn. That was the Republican Party. That was the MAGA movement. And then Trump has done his thing. I'm emphasizing this point because it's not clear that the Trump administration is responsible for the oldest and most powerful institution of higher education determining that under the rubric of academic freedom, that a concept to explain how the United States came into being, how Australia came into being, New Zealand, South Africa, Israel, is now no longer acceptable in its classrooms.
Is that wait, hold on. I would phase out. Are you saying you can't use the concept of settler colonialism?
I'm saying that if you choose to use it, you will find yourself under suspicion of being anti-Semitic. And by the way, just so that I said I would mention this, there is now a government document where 37 faculty members have been identified by the federal government as a result of the anti-Semitism task force, and yours truly is on that list.
I'm aware of that, yeah.
Because I teach a class that teaches settler colonialism. Because, my God, how could you explain how the United States came into being?
Well, the thing is, in Ned Blackhawk's book, on the unmaking of American history, he talks about indigenous settler colonialism.
Of course.
Indigenous empires constantly engaged in settler colonialism against each other. It's called being human.
Yeah.
Thucydides. How do you teach Thucydides without talking about, taking over cities and moving in and,
Well, on this point, and this is all in Jason's book, so we have not strayed off course here. Many of you might have read one of Bill Ackman's screeds. Yes, the mics are open. Yes. I'm being told it's question time, but it is up to you to ask a question. So come up to the mics. So Bill Ackman, the hedge fund, now right-winger who led the crusade against Claudine Gay, helped to put in circulation the idea that any teaching of oppressors and the oppressed is also definitionally anti-Semitic.
Which is unbelievable because when you think about Israel and try to understand what's happening to Jewish people now, you have to think both sides of that. You have to think this is a group that's been oppressed for so long, and this is a consequence, this kind of lack of empathy and inability is being justified by that history of oppression.
Yeah.
So how do you even, you need both concepts to understand Judaism today.
Yeah.
And also it's like my colleague at Hanan Haver, my colleague at Yale, who we got from Hebrew University, Jerusalem, the greatest scholar of Israeli literature alive. I first met him when I published a piece in the New York Times in 2016 talking about how I said, we're talking about Palestine and in Gaza and saying, I worry, I know it's extreme to say, but I worry about, I think about parallels between what happened to my family and what's happening to Palestinians today. I know this is extreme, and I get this email from a colleague saying, "Dear colleague, I enjoyed your column in the New York Times, but did you know that all Israeli literature, like most of Israeli literature since 1948, is about the very comparison that you say is extreme?" So all this stuff is told, and then Hanan got the Knesset under Likud to make it legal to use the term Nakba by using the argument that that's the Palestinian name for the foundation
and
of
the Likud is Netanyahu's party.
Right. So it was not legal or to use in the media to call the founding of the State of Israel the disaster, which is the Palestinian viewpoint. But Hanan used the argument that we're an oppressed people, and we can never let an oppressed people's viewpoint be erased. And that won the Likud over.
Yeah.
So, this is the thing, the discourse here. Israel, people are much clearer. Nobody would give...
Okay, so we had our first question, maybe our only one, but if you want a question, you better move quickly.
First, I just want to say thank you for your words so far. It's been a really interesting discussion, and I think I appreciate any space that continues to bring up Palestine, especially on vacation spaces. It can be very contradictory to be on an island and having a lavish experience while, we know people are aided by our government literally being starved to death right now. And yet, being able to bring these conversations to space like this is really important. The question I wanted to bring up is something you guys name is colonialism is key, in that when you talk about the results of the linchpin that the right has been able to use to attack higher education, which has been it's a fascist goal no matter what, and yet what has allowed them to be successful in their campaign is the anti-colonial struggle in this country. And in so many ways, both the right and the left has laid the foundation for colonialism coming home to roost, which is M.A. Cesar's understanding of fascism. And that what we are seeing here with the destruction of the rule of law, with the kidnapping of people in the streets, is colonialism, what we have been doing to other countries for decade after decade after decade, finally coming home. And the ways that Biden supported police destroying encampments, the ways that Northwestern, there are literally I am a graduate of Northwestern.
And my daughter.
Yes.
Oh my God.
I wasn't going to highlight that point.
I say that because I'm going to cut her off in a minute. But
And the ways that universities like Northwestern, there were already lawsuits of Chinese faculty or Chinese faculty member who committed suicide, and the family, her estate, are suing Northwestern for racism and discrimination, a lawsuit that was started before the Trump administration. And so universities have already been suppressing left organizers, suppressing DEI hires, suppressing diverse hires before the Trump administration came into office. We were already skirting the... Anyways.
Oh, no. Yeah. Thank you, Jordan.
The question... Okay. And yet, given that colonialism is so fundamental, the Democrats, our main counter, they're ignoring this. And yet people like Tucker Carlson are naming it. And so my question is, just wanted to bring initial points of discussion. My question is,
Jordan,
is there a precedent historically for so many people are like Tucker Carlson, I would never side with him, because he's an evil right-wing person, and he is the one who is calling out Israel. We shouldn't be supporting Israel. Is there a precedent in other countries that have experienced fascism where people actually do say yes and to an alliance with those on the right, combining with those on the left to counter...
Should we be teaming up with Steve Bannon right now?
Basically.
Right, got it. Okay.
Is there a precedent for that?
Right.
Historically.
Well, Marjorie Taylor Greene... Well, the problem is Tucker Carlson... this is what I mean about this. Israel's actions create anti-Semitism. And Tucker Carlson and Marjorie Taylor Greene are people who I do not think they engage in conspiracy theories that are very deeply rooted anti-Semitic conspiracy theories, like Great Replacement theory. Now, the Nazis were pro-Israel, they wanted there to be a Jewish country before they switched. They changed their view. The idea that they had until 1936 was, okay, we're going to get rid of all the Jews, and that's good, and we'll deport people to Palestine. But then they switched, and they said, oh no, that is then going to become the capital of the global conspiracy. So that's what I would want to know about someone like Tucker Carlson or Marjorie Taylor Greene. Are they thinking of Israel as the capital of a global, are they thinking of Israel correctly as an ethno-nationalist state that has, as Arendt and Einstein were worried about, become fascist? Or are they thinking of it as the capital of a global conspiracy to dominate the world? And I would worry with those figures it would be more the latter.
We'll keep an eye on them. Yeah.
Yeah. Please.
All right, we're going to take the last two, and then Jason will reply, and we'll be done. Yeah.
So I didn't know that you had also moved to Toronto, but when I saw that Timothy Snyder was leaving Yale and went to Toronto, and I felt like he was sort of the person who had best popularized, how to understand tyranny and fascism, it worried me. And I'm curious, because we touched on it here, but you didn't go any further, about how do the rest of us who don't have anywhere to go and haven't really thought this through, how do we analyze for ourselves to the extent, if we're not, I'm a documentary filmmaker. I feel like my fight is here to try to figure out what to do to sort of save another form of, public information. But the time might come where it might be time for me to get on a boat. So I'm just curious how you think about it for the rest of us, having made that decision for yourself. Okay, take Jules.
This is kind of a follow-up to the former question, because I think you have to clarify why you've left. Right. I don't think you've done it to present an example for what everybody should do, because it's only those, you'll pardon me, academicians who can go and get a job at a university in Toronto, who can get up and leave and rearrange their lives. Most Americans are here. And however, I respect your leaving, because I know you will continue to be a voice, and a free voice, against fascism and Trump. So, good luck, and I really hope that you keep writing about it. So I guess that's kind of my point. You're not saying all the Jews should leave.
Stay here.
At all.
No.
And I'm wearing a hat that says resist, and that's where I'm coming from.
Okay. One more. So those are the same question. All right, same question. This is our last question.
Okay, thanks so much. This has been a fascinating discussion. I read an article in the Wall Street Journal recently that said that Harvard was about to create some sort of group to study conservative thought and political scholarship. And with all of the universities that are entering to these agreements with the current administration, are they really universities anymore? And I wonder if this thing that Harvard is trying to establish is really conservative thought, or it's really just propaganda to appease the powers that be.
Right. You're going to get, that's just par for the course, starting with this point. It's just par for the course that in all authoritarian countries, when they go after the universities, they stuff loyalists in the, if you look at what's happening in Florida, they'll even go as far as to stuff universities with just donors. So it's going to be, that's just how it works. They'll take minor people who couldn't otherwise get, the STEM departments. I said to Jeffrey Goldberg on Friday night when he was talking about leftist,
the Atlantic.
Yeah, when I raised these issues with him, and he was like, the leftist humanities professors, and I said, there's no registered Republicans in the Yale economics department. There's the chemistry department has, I think, one. So it is nothing.
And what does conservatism look like in science? Is it anti-scientism? Is a viewpoint that we ought to embrace? People who don't believe in facts?
Yeah,
or global warming, for that matter?
So let me address this. First of all, I should say that Tim Snyder was already in Toronto. His decision was not a political decision. It was a personal decision. So he had to go for various, he didn't have to go, but it was a personal decision. So I'm the one to blame. What I did was the act I did had a social meaning. That social meaning is not up to me to determine. So it could be that the social meaning of that act there are bad meanings it had, and I hear that. I had hoped, my intention was to start a conversation to send a signal about how extreme the situation is. That was what I intended to do. But, whether the intention of an action is what the consequences, whether you can constrain the intention of the action entirely to your intention, well, history shows you can't really do that. So, I hope at any rate it alarmed people. That was my goal.
Thank you very much. So Jason will be signing books over there. I keep pointing to the book signing tent, and the book sales tent is over there.